They called humans weak. From the very first moment the ships of the Galactic Council saw Earth, their judgment was clear. They looked at the people of this small blue planet and decided that these creatures were fragile, unworthy, and too soft for the hard life of the stars. The Council races had lived for thousands of years. Their bodies were strong, their minds sharp, their technologies older than human history itself. To them, humans were nothing more than children playing with fire, destined to burn themselves out before they could ever become anything greater. When the first alien envoys stepped onto Earth, they wore expressions of curiosity mixed with amusement. They studied human bones and saw how easily they broke. They measured human lifespans and laughed at how quickly they ended. They compared our weapons, our machines, our ships to theirs, and found nothing worth fearing. Short-lived, soft-bodied, desperate little things, one alien commander said, and the others agreed. They gave us a place among the stars, but not as equals. No, humans were taken as workers, as servants, as a weak race fit only to carry out tasks that others no longer wanted. It was humiliating, but it was also the truth of that time. Humans had only just begun to step into space. Our first colonies were small, fragile domes on barren rocks. Our ships were thin metal shells, rattling against the silence of the void. In the eyes of the Council, we were like insects, crawling across a vast field, making noise but achieving nothing of value. And yet even then, something different lived inside humanity. Something the aliens could not measure with their tools or see with their eyes. The first humans who worked under alien command felt it in their hearts. They were sent into deep mines, ordered to cut stone and crystal for alien empires. Their hands bled, their lungs burned, but still they kept working. They carried cargo across frozen planets, dragging machines twice their weight, while their masters watched with cold eyes. But in those long days, a thought grew quietly inside them. Yes, we are weaker. Yes, we are shorter-lived. But we endure. We bend, but we do not break. The aliens did not see this. They saw only tired faces and thin arms. They did not notice the way humans learned quickly, the way their eyes followed every machine, memorizing how it worked. They did not realize that every insult, every moment of cruelty was being carved deep into the human heart. Humans remembered. Humans waited. Back on Earth, stories spread of alien arrogance. Families whispered of how their sons and daughters were treated as little more than tools. In homes lit by dim lamps, people told each other, "They call us weak." Some spoke with anger, some with sorrow, but all felt the same flame inside. Humans had always been underestimated. On their own planet, they had been hunted by beasts, larger and stronger. They had faced storms, plagues, and endless wars. Every time they had struggled, fallen, and risen again. Weakness had been their cloak, but survival had always been their truth. Children growing up under alien rule listened to these stories. They saw their parents bend their backs, but not their pride. They watched their older brothers and sisters return from the mines with bruises but with eyes that still shone. Slowly, a seed began to grow in the heart of humanity. A seed of defiance, small but unyielding. The galaxy may call them weak, but one day, they would answer. And somewhere deep, in the silence of space, in the black oceans between stars, the future waited. It did not wait for the strongest or the oldest. It waited for the race that could endure, that could dream, that could build even with broken hands. It waited for the humans. The galaxy had laughed. The galaxy had mocked. But the galaxy had not yet heard the sound of human steel. The Council allowed Earth to join their empire, but not as an equal. Humans were not given seats in the great halls where laws were made. They were not trusted with command over fleets or armies. Instead, they were placed at the bottom, given roles that no other species wanted. They became miners, builders, servants, and carriers. Wherever there was work too dangerous, too heavy, or too boring for others, the Council sent humans. In the beginning, many humans accepted this fate. It was better, some thought, to be part of the empire than to be crushed by it. They told themselves that maybe over time respect would grow. Maybe if they worked hard, if they proved themselves, the other races would see their worth. But the truth was cruel. The harder they worked, the more invisible they became. To the council, humans were nothing more than a tool, a small, soft-bodied race that could be replaced without care. The mines of distant moons filled with human laborers. They chipped away at crystal walls until their fingers bled. The factories on hot planets burned with the sweat of human workers, who built machines they were never allowed to own. Cargo ships crossed endless space with human crews carrying goods, but their names were never written in the records of glory. Their masters spoke of them as one might speak of a machine, useful, but unimportant. Yet, while their hands bled, their eyes were watching. While they carried heavy loads, their minds were learning. Humans noticed the way engines were built, the way weapons were powered, the way ships were repaired. They were not given lessons, but they did not need them. Every day of labor became a secret school. Every insult became a reason to remember. There was pain, yes. There was sorrow. Many cried in silence, feeling the weight of chains even if no metal bound their wrists. But humans had lived with pain before. On Earth, their ancestors had struggled through winters with little food, through wars where everything seemed lost. Pain was not the end. It was fuel. And slowly, in the shadows of the council's arrogance, that fuel began to burn. Among the workers, quiet words began to spread. In the mines, one would whisper to another, "We build their weapons, but one day, we will build our own." In the factories, someone would murmur, "They call us weak, but weak hands can still hold steel." On the cargo ships, crews would look out at the stars and dream, "These skies will not always belong to them. One day they will belong to us too." The other races did not hear these whispers. They were too busy laughing. They mocked humans openly, calling them short livers, soft bones, and dust children. To them, humans were nothing but fragile shadows that would fade quickly in the long history of the galaxy. But while the council laughed, the seed of rebellion grew stronger. On Earth itself, leaders tried to negotiate, but they found only closed doors. Humanity was given scraps of power, tiny rights meant to quiet their voices. Still, they waited, patient as stone. For every insult, they stored anger. For every hardship, they stored strength. And for every moment they were told they were nothing, they dreamed of becoming everything. No one saw the change coming. Not the council, not the great empires, not the proud races who thought themselves untouchable. But the change was already alive. It was alive in the hearts of children growing up beside machines, in the hands of workers who memorized every tool, in the eyes of dreamers staring out into the dark sky. Steel began to whisper in their dreams. The sound of hammers, the spark of fire, the weight of iron. It all lived inside them now. Humanity was still bending, still enduring, but something stronger was being forged. The galaxy thought humans were weak. They were wrong. They had mistaken patience for surrender, silence for obedience. What they did not understand was this. Every day of labor was shaping not slaves, but builders of a future. Every insult was sharpening not despair, but steel. And in the quiet corners of space, the first sparks of that steel had already begun to glow. The first rebellion did not begin with armies. It did not begin with leaders in fine uniforms or speeches in great halls. It began far away, on a frozen mining moon called Karth. Karth was a place of silence and pain. The air was thin, the ground hard, and the cold cut through the bones like knives. Humans were sent there by the thousands, forced to dig for crystals that powered the fleets of the council. Day after day they swung their tools against the rock, their backs bent, their hands torn. Overseers from other races watched. From high platforms, their whips and weapons ready to punish anyone who slowed. Among those miners was a man whose name history never kept. Some say he was young, strong, and angry. Others say he was old, tired, and broken. No one truly knows. But what is remembered is what he did. One day, when the overseer raised his hand to strike a child who had collapsed from exhaustion, the man stepped forward. In his grip was no weapon, only the hammer he used to break stone. But that hammer, in that moment, became something more. With one swing, he struck down the overseer. The alien fell, and for a heartbeat, silence ruled the mine. The other humans froze. Fear had been their companion for so long that they did not know what to do. But then, something stirred inside them. It was not just the fall of an overseer. It was the fall of fear itself. The man lifted the hammer, high, and his voice echoed through the frozen tunnels. No more. Those two words spread like fire. The miners, once bent and silent, rose together. They seized their tools, pickaxes, hammers, drills, and turned them into weapons. The overseers called for guards, but the humans fought like wolves cornered for too long. The mines of Karth, once filled only with the sound of stone breaking, now thundered with the cries of rebellion. News of the uprising spread quickly across the empire. At first, the council dismissed it as nothing. A small riot, they said. A minor problem. They believed humans would be crushed easily. But they were wrong. For every miner on Karth who fell, 2 more rose to fight. And when the council finally retook the moon, it was no longer just a mine, it had become a legend. The nameless man with the hammer was gone, lost in the chaos. Some say he died fighting. Others believe he escaped into the tunnels and lived on in secret. But his act had already planted something far greater than himself. Across the galaxy, humans whispered his story. In the factories, in the cargo ships, in the dark corners of distant colonies, the tale was told. One of us stood up, one of us struck back. The council tried to bury the truth. They punished entire colonies, silenced entire families, and erased records of the rebellion, but they could not erase the memory. The hammer of Karth had already become a symbol, not of violence alone, but of hope. From that moment, humans began to look at their tools differently. A spanner was not just for fixing engines, it was something that could break chains. A piece of steel was not just scrap, it was the beginning of armor. A broken ship was not junk, it was the start of a new vessel. Everywhere, in secret, humans began to prepare. Small groups trained in silence, passing on what little they had learned. Smugglers carried stolen parts hidden in crates. Workers built weapons from scraps while pretending to build machines for their masters. A quiet rhythm began to grow across human space, the rhythm of steel against steel, hammers striking, sparks flying. The galaxy still believed humans were weak. They still believed the rebellion of Karth was nothing more than an accident, but they did not understand. They did not see how deep the fire had already spread. For the first time, humanity had stopped bending. For the first time, they had struck. Ag. And though their weapons were simple and their ships were little more than wrecks, something greater was now alive. It was not just rebellion. It was the beginning of a song of steel that would one day echo across the stars. The council laughed when they heard of human uprisings. To them, the rebellion on Karth was nothing more than noise, small fires in the dark, sparks that could be crushed under the weight of their fleets. They believed humans could never stand against the power of the galaxy's oldest empires. So, they gathered their warships. The fleets they sent were grand and terrifying. Each vessel was a fortress of shining metal, lined with plasma cannons that could burn a city to ash. Their shields shimmered like walls of light, stronger than anything humans had ever built. To the council, this was not a war, it was punishment, a lesson to remind humanity of its place. Against such power, the human ships looked like broken knives. They were built from scraps, patched together from old cargo haulers and stolen wrecks. Their armor was thin. Their weapons were crude. To anyone looking from the outside, it seemed hopeless. But humans had learned something the council had never understood. A sharp knife, even if old and chipped, can still cut. And when survival is the only choice, a blade in desperate hands is far more dangerous than a sword in careless ones. The battles began in the silent black of space. The council fleets advanced in perfect lines, their formation flawless, their confidence unshaken. They fired with precision, their plasma blasts tearing holes through human ships. Entire crews were lost in moments, their vessels breaking apart into burning fragments. But for every human ship destroyed, Another fought on. Humans did not fight, like the other races. They fought like wolves. They fought with fury, with desperation, with a fire that came not from strength of body, but from strength of will. When a human ship was too damaged to fight, its crew would turn it into a weapon. They rammed into enemy cruisers, tearing through their hulls with explosions that shook the stars. One story tells of a ship called the Resolute. Surrounded and broken, its captain gave the final order to overload the reactor. The ship exploded, in a blinding flash, dragging 3 Council warships down with it. The crew was lost, but their sacrifice became a tale that spread across every human colony. "The Resolute still fights," people whispered, "in every flame that burns against the Council." The Council began to grow uneasy. For every 1,000 humans who fell, 1 fleet of theirs was crippled. For every victory they declared, the ground beneath them shook with loss. They had never faced an enemy willing to throw everything away for the hope of freedom. To them, life was something to preserve. To humans, life was something to give, if it meant their children might live free. As the war spread, human ships grew bolder. They struck from the shadows, ambushing supply lines, attacking lone warships, and vanishing into the black before reinforcements could arrive. The Council called them cowards, but in truth, it was strategy. Humans could not win by standing toe-to-toe against giants, but they could bite and bleed and wait for the moment the giant stumbled. The galaxy began to notice. Other species who once mocked humans now watched with quiet awe. How could such a fragile race with such short lives face the great powers of the stars and not break? How could bones so thin carry a spirit so heavy with fire? The Council did not laugh anymore. Their speeches grew harsh. Their punishments grew cruel. They promised the galaxy that humans would be erased, wiped away like dust in the wind. But even as they spoke, more human ships rose from the dark, their engines burning like stars. Their crews ready to die if it meant striking one more blow. The war was no longer a rebellion. It was survival. It was defiance. And it was proof of a truth the galaxy had never known before. Weak hands can still wield steel, and steel, once raised, can burn across the stars. The war dragged on, and the years began to carve their weight into humanity. What started as desperate uprisings and wild strikes soon grew into something far greater. Human colonies, once quiet and weak, began to change. They no longer looked like scattered settlements under alien command. They became furnaces of fire and steel. On Earth, the old cities became factories that never slept. Day and night, machines roared, pounding metal into armor, hammering engines into life. In the colonies, children learned to walk beside the sound of forges, their lullabies replaced by the rhythm of hammers. Every human settlement turned its heart toward war. The galaxy had called them weak, but weakness was gone now, burned away in the fires of survival. Humans had no luxury of beauty in their weapons. They could not craft elegant ships like the Council, with shining hulls and delicate designs. Their ships were ugly, heavy and scarred. Plates of steel were welded one over another, engines strapped together from whatever could be found. But what these ships lacked in beauty, they carried in strength. They were war machines with one purpose: to endure and to kill. The first of these ships were called steel burners. They earned the name not because of how they looked, but because of what they did. Their cannons spat fire that tore through enemy shields. Their engines roared like storms, leaving trails of burning light in the dark. And when their enemies looked upon them, they did not see elegance, they saw death carried on iron wings. It was not only the ships that changed, the people changed too. The children who had once been mocked as short livers grew up in the shadow of war. They learned to repair machines before they could write their names. They learned to hold a rifle before they reached adulthood. Songs were no longer sung of peace, but of sacrifice, of fire, of freedom. Humanity was no longer just a race. It was a forge, and every soul was iron being shaped by flame. For the first time, the Council began to feel fear. Their fleets, once unchallenged, now faced ships that would not fall easily. Human weapons, though rough, could pierce their armor. Human tactics, though desperate, were clever. Every battle became harder, every victory costlier. And behind each clash, there was always another human fleet waiting, built in the hidden forges of their colonies. But the cost for humanity was heavy. Entire families lived and died inside factories. Many never saw the stars they were fighting for. Their lives burned away in the heat of endless work. Soldiers boarded ships knowing they might never return. Yet no one turned back. They told each other that their suffering had meaning, that their blood and sweat were the steel that would protect their children. And in that belief, they found strength greater than any weapon. One story tells of a colony on a barren world called Jaren. The ground was dry, the air thin, but the people there built ships from the bones of wrecks scattered across the desert. For years they worked without rest, their children growing up beside the skeletons of unfinished vessels. When the council fleet finally arrived to destroy them, the colony launched their ships, 40 war machines of fire and steel, each carrying the names of those who had died building them. They fought until none remained, but their sacrifice shattered the enemy fleet. The galaxy still remembers Jaren as the Forge of Ghosts. These stories spread across the stars. They were carried not just by human voices, but by whispers among other races. Those who once mocked now spoke in quiet tones of the human spirit. The council called humans reckless. Others called them dangerous. But all agreed on one thing. Humanity could not be broken. Behind every weapon, behind every ship, behind every battle cry was one truth. Humans would never kneel again. The galaxy had tried to make them servants. It had tried to make them tools. But instead, it had made them into something else. Into steel. And that steel was now burning brighter than the stars themselves. The council, humiliated again and again by human resistance, decided to end the war in one final stroke. They gathered the greatest armada the galaxy had ever seen. 10,000 ships, drawn from every corner of their empire. It was a storm of firepower so vast that even the stars seemed to dim before it. The council promised this would be the end. They told the galaxy that humanity would be erased, that nothing would remain but ash and silence. The armada chose its target, the human stronghold on the planet Arion. Arion was more than just a colony. It was the beating heart of human resistance, the place where forges thundered day and night, where fleets were built, and where dreams of freedom were carved into steel. The council believed that if Arion fell, humanity would fall with it. But when their fleets arrived, they found something waiting. Across the skies of Arion hung 1,000 human warships. They were not beautiful like the council's vessels. Their hulls were scarred, their armor rough, their engines burning with a fierce light. On each ship, names were painted in bold letters. Names of colonies destroyed, names of families lost, names of children who would never grow old. Every ship was a memory. Every memory was a weapon. The battle began with fire. The council fleets moved in perfect formation, their cannons unleashing storms of plasma. Entire sections of the human defense line burned at once. Ships exploded like falling stars, their crews lost to the void. But the humans did not break. They tightened their formation, their captains shouting orders with voices steady as iron. Human ships struck back. Their cannons roared, their missiles screamed through the dark. One by one, council vessels fell, torn apart by fire and steel. Still, for every ship destroyed, 10 more pressed forward. The sky above Arion turned red with fire, a storm of death that lasted without pause. For 7 days and 7 nights, the battle raged. Ships collided, reactors exploded, engines burned. Some human vessels, crippled and beyond saving, turned themselves into weapons. Crews overloaded their cores and hurled their ships into the heart of the enemy, taking down massive war cruisers in blinding flashes of light. The humans called these sacrifices flames of honor, and their memory burned brighter than any star. On the 3rd day, the council nearly broke through. Their fleets pierced deep into the human lines, and for a moment it seemed as if Arion would fall. But then came the Iron Star, the largest human warship ever built. Forged from the wrecks of 100 battles, its hull was layered with steel so thick that no single weapon could pierce it. The Iron Star charged forward, its cannons unleashing a storm that shattered the Council spearhead. The tide of battle turned once more. By the 7th day, the skies above Arion were a graveyard of burning wrecks. Tens of thousands had died, their bodies lost to the silence of space. The Council armada, once proud and unshakable, was broken. Entire fleets lay in ruins. Their perfect formations were gone, replaced by scattered survivors fleeing into the dark. And yet, among the wreckage, the human fleet still stood, scarred, bleeding, but unbroken. When the last Council ship fled, silence fell across the battlefield. Human crews looked out at the wrecks of their enemies and wept. They had lost so much, friends, families, whole colonies, but they had not lost themselves. Arion still lived, humanity still lived, and their steel had outlasted the storm. Theo, Galaxy, watching from afar, was stunned. The Council's greatest armada, once thought invincible, had been shattered by the very race they had called weak. In every corner of the stars, whispers began to spread. Whispers of the Battle of Arion. Whispers of the humans who had faced a storm of fire and refused to fall. It was the day the Galaxy realized a terrible truth. Humanity could not be erased. The Battle of Arion changed everything. For generations, the Galaxy had laughed at humans. They had called them weak, fragile, and short-lived. They had seen them as servants, as tools, as nothing more than dust beneath the feet of greater races. But when the smoke cleared above Arion, the laughter was gone. The Council's greatest armada lay in ruins. Ships that had once carried fear across the stars now floated broken, their wrecks drifting in silence. For every human vessel that burned, 3 enemy warships had fallen beside it. The Galaxy watched in silence as the impossible became truth. Humanity had survived the storm, but survival was not enough. Humanity had changed. They were no longer the soft workers who bent their backs in mines and factories. They were no longer the silent carriers of other people's burdens. They had been tested in fire and loss, and what remained was steel. On Earth, people gathered in the streets when news of Arion spread. They lit fires in honor of the fallen. Children raised their voices in songs of freedom, their small hands clutching pieces of scrap metal as symbols of the sacrifice their people had made. Across the colonies, bells rang, hammers struck, and voices whispered the same words again and again. We are not weak. The Council, humiliated and broken, tried to speak of peace, but it was not out of kindness, it was out of fear. They had thought to crush humanity with force, but in doing so, they had created something unstoppable. Humanity no longer begged for a seat in their halls. Humanity no longer asked for respect. They would take it, forged in steel and written in fire. The Galaxy began to shift. Other races, once silent, now looked at humans with new eyes. Some saw them as dangerous, a wildfire that could not be controlled. Others saw them as hope, proof that the Council was not invincible. Small rebellions sparked across the Empire, each whispering the same lesson. If humans could fight, so could they. But for humanity, the war was more than politics. It was personal. Every ship they built carried the names of the lost. Every soldier who stood carried the weight of their ancestors. Humanity was not fighting only for land or power. They were fighting so that their children would never again be called weak, so that no voice in the Galaxy could laugh at them without fear. Stories of sacrifice spread like light through the darkness. People told of the miners on Karth, of the ship Resolute, of the Forge of Ghosts on Jaren, of the Iron Star at Arion. These were not just tales. They were the foundation of a new identity. Humanity was no longer a servant race. They were warriors, builders, dreamers, and survivors all at once. And as the Galaxy watched, they began to whisper words that would never be forgotten. Words that would echo for generations. They called humans weak, but their steel burned. across the galaxy. These words became more than a saying, they became a vow. On every colony, on every ship, on every battlefield yet to come, humans carried them like a banner. They painted them on walls, carved them into steel, and whispered them to their children before sleep. It was not just pride. It was memory. It was honor. It was truth. Years later, when historians would speak of the war, they would not remember the exact number of ships or the precise dates of battles. They would remember the spirit of a people who refused to break. They would remember that when the galaxy thought humans were nothing, they proved to be everything. And somewhere, out in the silence of space, where wrecks of old ships still drifted, like ghosts, the echoes of that vow remained. The stars themselves seemed to carry it, a song of fire and steel, a promise that humanity would never again bow its head. The galaxy had once called them weak, but now every race knew the truth. Humanity was steel, and steel never bends.